We made it.
We did. Yeah, we had some exciting events behind scenes, but Priya and I both made it here today. And thank
You
you
know me,
all.
Kristen. It's never a dull moment.
Likewise for me. So, yeah, and we know how to dance with whatever comes up. So, yeah. Wonderful to be here with all of you today. And I just noticed I'm going to put my full name. I'm just going to rename myself here. Great. Um, all right. Well, how about we start with introducing ourselves, Priya? Do you like to go first?
Sure. First of all, I'm so happy to see you and to be with you. My name is Priya Nalkur. I use she and her pronouns. I'm based here in Austin, Texas. I'm the president of the Roundtable Institute. We do training and coaching and facilitation for leaders and coaches to bring more inclusion and equity into their practices. And I'm also the author of Stumbling Towards Inclusion, Finding Grace in Imperfect Leadership.
And you'll find those in the resources at the bottom of your screen, and we'll share them at the end of the webinar also. And I'm excited to be here. I studied under Priya, her Jedi for Coaches program, and I wanted to invite her to our conversation today because I so appreciate her approach to our topic today, the navigating difference and unconscious bias. And with that, I'll also share a little bit about me. So I'm Kristen Bentley. I'm Canadian, currently living in Costa Rica, and I have a coaching practice, and I am faculty for CTI. And my coaching practice, I'd like to describe it that it sits at the intersection of personal development and social change. And I work with people and really bring in a social and systemic analysis into my coaching. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today.
So, Kristen and I have some discussion topics planned for you, but we're prepared to dance with you to go where you want to go. We're here to talk about navigating difference and unconscious bias. So, Kristen, would you like me to go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah, sounds great.
Let me
Also,
do
I just want to name too, and seeing hellos in the chat come in. And this is my first time on this webinar platform of Zoom. So just invite and request some grace around if I fumble with trying to dance between all the different functionality. And I miss being able to see faces out there. So I'm going to imagine your faces.
Well, I love the way you started that because I will say that Kristen and I really want to do a forgiving presentation here, a webinar. And what I mean by that is that this is a place for us to be imperfect, to be fallible, to be human, to make mistakes, and to give each other grace and ourselves grace in the process of making those mistakes. Because if we are going to truly navigate difference and unconscious bias, we have to be willing to make those mistakes, notice those mistakes, and then repair when we do make those mistakes. So hopefully we will role model that behavior in the next hour or so with you.
Yeah. One of the other outcomes that we want, in addition to what Priya just shared, is that we know that this day is inviting coaches, people that already identify as coaches or exposed to coach training, and we want to use what you're already learning or what you already know about being a coach, tying that in with ICF competencies to help you explore this topic and to take it forward into your coaching and into your life.
So let's
So,
go.
yeah, let's go. So where we're going to start, and Priya, I'm wondering if I can just invite you to play from the slideshow option. I've got your whole screen right now with all the slides. Are
Oh,
you able to do that?
I think I only see the first slide.
Okay. It's showing up with your background screen, but that's okay. We'll work with this. And actually,
Oh,
why don't we take the slide down for a moment? Because what the first thing that we're going to do, we don't need the slide for that. But what we want to invite you into is an exploration an exploration that came out a little mumbled of the three words: navigate, difference, and unconscious bias. Technically, four words. Starting with navigate. And we have a question for you all, and please feel free to interact in the chat. What do we navigate as coaches? We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and type that in the chat. What do we navigate as coaches?
Okay, we're starting to see emotions. That's coming up a lot here. We're navigating processing, troubling waters, feelings, our own bias, potential, identities, history, lack of clarity, bias in all caps.
Life
Yeah, we're
transitions, conflict. Yeah.
navigating the moment, the current moment. We're navigating culture, perspective, what's not being said, what is being said, our
Yeah,
own internal voice, our external voice. Gosh, yeah, like we could not have bargained for better answers here, right, Chris?
exactly. Yeah,
Navigating
including
a whole lot of stuff.
yeah, and including the bond, Anna has said here. And as Priya and I had a conversation about this, we feel like there's three pieces to highlight that a lot of what you are sharing here highlights. We navigate ourself as coach, our own beliefs, our own values, our own lived experience, our own expertise, so many factors that are going on inside of us. We navigate the other, what's important to them, all of what you shared here related to the other person sitting in front of us. And we navigate the relationship between us and how all of that intersects with each other, too. And as we all know as coaches, what our intention is to do is to suspend our own frame of reference in service of really helping our client find their own answers and explore their own frame of reference. What else would you add, Priya?
That's beautiful, right? I would just add that because we're navigating different pieces of an environment, there are going to be intersections, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be tensions and polarities, as much as there's also going to be alignment and harmony and connection, right? So in the space between us and inside of us, we're navigating a lot of complexity. And because of that complexity, that's why we're wanting to invite this idea that in that complexity we can be right, we can be wrong, we can explore. There's a lot of curiosity that we're going to get into that, of course. We're coaches. We can't not get into curiosity.
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but there's a lot of complexity, and we want to definitely impart that idea that it's complex.
yeah. And in that complexity, one of the other pieces that was shared in the chat, there's pieces that are unseen or hidden too. And that's part of what we want you to walk away with here is what are the parts that I'm not aware of in my coaching, in the relationship, in my client, and be able to expand even your curiosity around those aspects. What am I not yet seeing?
Great. So, shall we move to the next idea of difference?
Sounds good. Sounds
Okay,
good.
so we can't help it but ask coaching questions about this stuff. But when you hear the word or when you see the word or envision the word difference, what comes up for you with that word? Go ahead and populate the chat box. Let's get busy again. So difference. It's misunderstanding, it's conflict, it's perspectives, experiencing. Now we're starting to see a different energetic approach to this word difference, right? Now we're starting to see some other things show up here. What are you noticing, Kristen?
Yeah, I'm seeing they're coming in so quickly. It's moving on my screen. And thank you for your interaction. Diversity, race, gender, sexual orientation, discomfort, individuality, opportunities, embracing uniqueness, variety, different points of view, newness, separation, opportunity to learn, confusion, too, challenges. And even questions. What is difference different from what? Yeah, even that question, right, comes up when you think of the word. What is it and different from what? Yeah. I once, in one of my trainings, that the question different from what is actually a place to look for what assumptions you might be making. I think it was, um, oh my gosh, I want to get the correct reference, but that even with the word diversity, underneath diversity is diverse from what? And under that, we're making assumptions about what is the norm or what is the expected. So thank you,
Yeah,
Allison, for
there's
that
there's
question.
often an implicit frame of reference that we
Hmm.
bring into our coaching or into our own dynamics with ourselves and with others. And we have to be willing to problematize that, get curious about it, explore it with and for our client, even as we might be doing that work ourselves. So I think that's a really important point. That norm is something to think critically about, to be curious about. What are we assuming is the norm between you and me?
One of the um, common, I was going to say norms, but it's not quite um, a norm, but a common experience that I witness in the classroom and outside of the classroom, to be honest, the coaching classroom is this excitement when people see similarities, like a shared experience in each other, and connection is created through that. And we're going to emphasize a few key takeaways that we want for you around difference. And both Priya and I hold an excitement and a passion and an invitation to learn to expand, to have as much excitement and create connection through difference as we do as a common human experience, as we do for shared experiences or commonalities. So,
So if I could just build off that, like practical exercise you can do for yourself at home. You can do it now, or you can do it after the webinar. One of the exercises we do in our JEDI program, JEDI, by the way, stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And one of the exercises we do is we have everybody write down on a piece of paper the 5 people that they consider to be their closest friends. We write down their names, and you're not sharing this with anyone except yourself. And then we have them write down, okay, what do you know of their social identities? What do you know of their age? What do you know of their gender expression? What do you know of their sexual orientation, of their cultural identity? And you go through and you name it, and pretty soon people have a spreadsheet of their friends' names and their social identities. And then, of course, people are starting to assume the next question, which is that you write your name at the bottom and write all of your social identities. And people start to see, wow, my closest friends all look and act like me, right? We have similar social identities. But the amazing part is not just recognizing that our 5 closest friends are just like us. But what is amazing to me is how people punish themselves for that. Oh gosh, I don't have enough diversity in my 5 friends, or I should really do better. I should reach outside of my immediate circle and make more friends and really diversify your network without us even naming a judgment. But there is a pull for us naturally to want to diversify and be in different experiences. Now, I promised you a forgiving approach. There's a reason that we have our closest friends just like us. It feels safe. We have proximity there. We have similarity. We have some common ground. There's a reason for that. But there's also a reason for us to diversify those networks. And so, just as much as we feel comfort in sameness, we can feel comfort in difference too if we're willing to get curious and explore. So, that's one of the takeaways we have around this idea of difference.
thank you for that example. And Priya, there's a request to put those various traits in the chat. So if you want to name them again, we can even have Maite type them in the chat for us, or if you prefer to to
Sure, might
technology.
take if you don't mind. I mean, actually, you can do this with all sorts of traits, but you can do what we do is age, we do disability, we do geographic location, we do education, race, gender expression, and sexual orientation. But there's all kind you can do religion, you can do height, you can do weight, you could do accent, you can do language, you could do all sorts of things. Marital status. Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? You can do all sorts of things.
Thank you for that. Maite's also offered to share the slides for us. She's able to put them on the presenter view.
You want to do
So
that? What do you think?
it's what we can do is pull up the slide related to difference. And so,
I went
yeah,
ahead and
there
shared
we
it.
go. That's perfect. Great. And it's showing differently now. There we go. We've got it.
All right. Which slide do you want me to show?
The one with the key takeaways related to difference.
Great.
Here we go. So we just talked about this point, creating connection through difference, not just similarity. And Priya gave a great example of practice or um, a reflection that you can do. Priya also earlier mentioned curiosity as a coach, and many of you in the chat did. We really invite you to double down on your curiosity when it comes to difference. And part of that is recognizing where you may stop with your curiosity, what areas you tend to not ask questions about, and what might hold you back from doing that. We will be referencing, and on one of the other slides, we've got some language specifically from the ICF competencies. And in the resource section on your screen, there is a link to the ICF competencies. But being sensitive to and curious about a person's identity, about their cultural background, about their environment, their experience, their context, those are all part of the competencies written into the competencies in the ICF. So it's not just a nice to have or, something that just Priya and I are passionate about, really to be aligned with the ICF and to be aligned with the ethics. This level of curiosity is an important place to be pointing your attention.
I love what you said. Like, what are the questions I'm not asking, even though I'm sort of desperately wanting to ask? And all 212 of you on this call know that coaching is a courageous act. And navigating difference is similarly an incredibly courageous act. And so is curiosity, by the way. So asking the questions that are right on the tip of your tongue, but you're afraid for all that psychological conditioning that you've come to this moment with. What if I hurt them? What if I cause harm? What if I say the wrong thing? What if they misunderstand me? All of that and overcoming that requires your courage and your presence. And what I have found is early on when I was coaching, I wouldn't ask those things because I was so afraid of hurting someone's feelings or saying the wrong thing or offending someone. And I missed so many opportunities, Kristen, to actually get at truth. And so today, even though sometimes with a very shaky voice, I ask those questions, my clients really appreciate the opportunity to correct me, to be understood, or to be seen in the question that I ask. And it often sounds like, how much does this story have to do with who you are as a person? And I might even name it. How much does this story have to do with you being an Indian man? How much does your fear of this or your joy of this have to do with this aspect of who you are? And maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but my client has the power to decide what is relevant and what narrative they choose to weave around the questions I ask. My job is to shine that flashlight for them.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing your experience. And I can so relate, Priya, because it wasn't, honestly, I was probably into my coaching career for about 5 or 6 years before I realized this was important. And I stumbled upon it in learning about it in a writing course, actually separate from coaching. But through that experience, I started to ask these questions in my designed alliance and getting curious. And I was really amazed how much more I learned about people, and for the most part, what a relief it was for people, for clients to be asked these questions. And that is whether people, I can assume they look like me and maybe have had a similar lived experience, or whether there was obvious differences between us.
Okay, so you raise a really important point, this idea of designing your alliance or building that initial connection with your client. And what are the norms and operating principles and rules and principles that you both will follow and expectations? And we're going to go into the mechanics of that because I think that's a really important place to sort of set the table and have and let your client know and understand from your client what this relationship is going to be about. Okay. So it can be called designed alliance. I think, Kristen, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's lots of different ways of calling this. In ICF, we call it co creating the relationship.
Yeah. And
And
it's
it's
competency B in the list of competencies. Designing alliance is specific coactive language, but in ICF, it's co-creating the relationship.
beautiful. So when you co-create the relationship, you all know that it doesn't just happen in that one meeting. I like to tell my clients it's developmental, it's emergent, it's iterative. There might be one thing that happens in our 6 months together that you decide or I decide we have to redesign our relationship and create something new or different than what we had before. So first thing is it's developmental and it can change, which is a beautiful thing. It gives you so much freedom to create and to speak about what this relationship is and what you want it to be. In that co-creation, today versus 10 years ago, I boldly tell my clients this is a space where we can talk about identity. This is a space where we can, if you'd like to, talk about your social identity, who you are. I will talk about it, mine identity, so that you have a way of talking about yours, but it doesn't have to be the way I talk about it. It's an example. Okay. So whereas I used to not share myself and who I am, I now share myself very similarly to the way I did here. My name is Priya and I use she and her pronouns, right? I'm an immigrant. I'm Canadian. I live in the United States. I have a complicated Indian immigrant history, et cetera, et cetera. And I bottom line it, but allow my client a model for how to introduce themselves to me, knowing that they can iterate, change, and develop it however they like. But it opens a door to a conversation of identity, difference, similarity, and inclusion. So that means that if I'm going to do that, I have to have a particular coaching mindset. I have to invite my client to be included in this conversation, and I have to include myself in this conversation. That's what inclusion means. Okay. And welcome all sorts of ways of being into this dynamic. Of course, as Kristen said, we're going to be curious. And there are times when it's hard to be curious. I've been coaching for years, and sometimes I have to remind myself, be curious, Priya, be curious, right? Because our biases get in the way. And we're going to talk about bias in a moment and how our biases actually don't want us to be curious. And so we're constantly navigating that tension in our heads. It's one thing to say, be curious, but it's a whole other thing to be curious. Okay. And the skills that will protect you and protect your curiosity, protect your courage, are listening to your intuition, naming what's going on, and really noticing it, and actually sharing observations and letting go of whatever defenses you have to be right, to be wrong, to provide value, but to just really be with the client and allow them the power, right? Not to equalize the power, but to name the power dynamic between you, give them the power to name themselves and include themselves and identify themselves. What would you add to that, Kristen?
I would just say, as I'm listening to you, what I've learned through stretching, and it has felt courageous for me to step into these um, skills that you're talking about and this type of curiosity, and especially around culture and identity and experience, lived experience, is that what I find by asking those questions, it actually gives people the safety and the room to realize, oh, this is welcome here. This part of me is welcome in the conversation. And I feel like with before, when I didn't specifically name those things, and like you said, in the Designed Alliance, share my social positioning and who I am, it in a way it felt like they were just not there, right? It was that piece that stayed hidden in the conversation. So it's by daring to do this, it creates the space for people to bring the wholeness, all aspects of themselves that are relevant to any given topic on any given day.
I love what you're saying. I think this word safety is really resonating for me, Kristen, because I think as coaches, we have to hold that as a responsibility and name it when it starts to feel unsafe or when we notice things in our clients that might be taking safety away from this dynamic. I think I might have shared this example with you before. I think of Jane Goodall, the
Mhm.
famous primatologist who studied with primates in East Africa. And her approach to anthropology completely changed the field. Whereas as anthropologists used to think of themselves as outsiders coming
Mhm.
into a culture to observe and take data and observations away and make conclusions, she said, I'm going to take on the role of neighbor instead of outsider. That means I live with you, beside you, but I have my own home and you have your own home. And when I come into your home, I'm a guest in your home. And so I can ask you all sorts of questions about why you have that picture on the wall, or who's the last person who visited you, or what did you just cook because it smells so delicious.
Mhm.
And then I leave your home and go back to my home, but I never co-opt your home. I never think of it as mine. I never try to appropriate your home as my own. You get to have that. And I'm a guest in that place. And that metaphor has helped me so much in my coaching to get back to fundamental curiosity. And
Mhm.
just when you think, my parents have visited my home so many times, but every time they come, there's something new they see, even though they've
Mhm.
been for 46 years. There's something new, there's something else that they can get curious about. And such is the relationship with our clients.
Yeah. The other piece, I have heard that story from you before, and I love it. And I make the assumption that Jane Goodall did not impose her human characteristics or her expectation of home on the primates too. And that's sometimes what we can subtly do in our unconscious bias place too, is we can impose on our clients' expectations and
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I get caught in that trap a lot. So on
Mhm.
that note, shall we move to unconscious bias? Did we have, oh, here it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So we want to just do a really quick thing here on unconscious bias, um, because it's been swimming under the surface of this conversation for the past 28 minutes or so. But really, what it is we have all sorts of biases. We have conscious biases and we have unconscious biases. Our conscious biases are things that we're very aware of that are preferences for us. Right? So, like, I have a preference for warmer rooms. Like, if it's 67 degrees Fahrenheit in my house, I'm freezing. I need to put on a jacket. Like, I have a preference for it to be warm. I have a preference to do things in a certain way. And I'm very aware of those preferences. But I also have preferences and biases, we call them biases, that I'm unaware of, and they actually serve a really important purpose. In any given moment, if you think about it, our brain is taking in an inordinate amount of data, right? It's taken in my screen, my ring light, my post-its on my wall, the color of my wall, this desk, the treadmill I'm standing on. It's taking in all of the information. It's like so much information. And so, for our brains to be able to make sense of our environment, it needs to create these shortcuts. And those shortcuts result in us being able to quickly see something or sense something, I should say, and interpret it quickly. However, our brains are not discerning in its ability to generalize and make stereotypes that could be harmful. That's where our conscious brain shows up. We need to be able to check the unconscious mistakes we're making or potential harm we're doing unconsciously because of those shortcuts. One of my favorite biases is the false attribution error, right? It's like, if you're late for this webinar, Kristen, it's because you didn't care and you're lazy. And like, even if I'm assuming positive intent, it's because, well, like, blah, blah. I come up with all sorts of excuses. But if I'm late, as I was to our green room check-in, it's it's because I had something else going on, or like I had a technical error or something else, right? So I attribute something to your intent that I wouldn't attribute to myself. And that false attribution error, even if we're right, gets us into trouble because then it colors the way I interact with you and it colors the way I interact with myself. And so we have to consciously interrupt those biases. Now, here's the trick. I don't want people to think that they need to get rid of those biases because they're here to stay. They serve very important functions. What we need to do is be aware of them and try to navigate and recognize, oh, they're playing in the background all the time. And I will at some point become aware of them, even if I'm not aware of it now. And when I become aware of it, I can check in with Kristen and repair, I can apologize, and I can have a conversation with her about it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I so appreciated that I learned from you too is in that skill that you highlighted of naming it, articulate what's going on, or intuition sharing too, even to say alongside this might be coming from my bias. I have this thing to offer, and it might be coming from my bias. So, may I offer it? And let me know if it does feel like it's from my bias, it's not related to you. So, that ability to learn more about our bias and sharing it transparently through that skill too. And
Beautiful.
it
I
feels
love
scary.
Yeah, what I love about that too is it gives our client permission to use the same language in their real worlds.
Mhm,
Hey, colleague, this might be coming from a bias, right? And to
mhm,
spread that. And then we can also turn it into a question. What bias might be at play here, client? And
mhm.
have them explore possible biases, knowing that we may never know what the answer to that, but it opens up exploration and reflection.
Mhm. Speaking of that, if you may play with me in this moment, I'm going to offer a scenario to the group to open up reflection and just to notice how quickly we make these assumptions and where our brain makes these shortcuts. And this actually is taken, I was watching a video, Valerie Alexander, I think her name is, on unconscious bias. So this scenario is from that. And so for a moment, close your eyes if that works for you, or take a soft focus in your space, but allow yourself to visualize and imagine what comes up as I walk you through this scenario. And allowing yourself to see what you see is a really important piece of it. So here's the scenario. Imagine that you're finishing up your workday and you've got to leave to get to the airport to catch a flight. And you've had a full workday, you order your Uber, you get in the car, and you take a sigh of relief that you're on your way to the airport. And you get to the airport and your check-in goes smoothly, and you end up getting to the gate with time to grab some food, something to drink. And as you're sitting there, you notice the flight crew boarding the plane before uh, everyone else. You get on the plane, everything on the plane goes smoothly. And you get to your hotel, you check in at the hotel, and you settle into your room, and you get excited about your day tomorrow. You're looking forward to the conference you're about to attend, where the CEO of a new tech startup is going to be speaking. And you've been looking forward to seeing this person speak tomorrow. So take a moment and just reflect back. Who did you see driving the Uber? Who were the flight attendants and the captain of the plane that you visualized? Who did you imagine checking you in at the hotel? And who did you imagine as the keynote speaker? And no judgments, no right, answers expected, but go ahead and type in the chat what you visualized. We're all going to have different visualizations. Where did your brain make the shortcuts? And even in specific roles, right? Like, who was the Uber driver? What did you notice about them? The flight crew, check-in counter, CEO.
So we're starting to see, so first of all, that was amazing because I'm like, I fell into all the traps, I'm sure. A man driving the Uber, a young white man was the CEO. The support people were all generic people in my brain, no individual characteristics. Lisa, thank you. Maybe the Uber driver was an immigrant. They kept changing. All men, no actual people, which is also fascinating. Females, a lot of diversity. I mostly pictured the hands doing all the tasks. That's fascinating too. Think about a bias there. Good mix of men and women, all had great haircuts. Love it. Right? But the idea is that we bring our projections
Our
to the,
shortcuts.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And the outcome of this exercise, again, is not that we expect certain answers as a whole, because we are going to have different images based on our lived experience. But what we want you to be aware of is when and how your brain makes those shortcuts. Because as Priya said, it serves a purpose, and it shows up, and it can show up in our coaching. And we want to catch them when they do.
Nice, nice. Yeah, my brilliant coach once said to me, and I have it on my post-it on the desk, you stop taking everything personally when you realize everything is a projection. And it's so true. When other people are coming, you're bringing projections naturally into the coaching space. And so is your client. And that is what we're navigating. That's when Kristen says we're navigating the space between us, we're navigating those projections. And it's a beautiful place for us to create narrative, for us to create truth, story, identity. It's so fertile ground for us to create who we are and who we mean to be.
All right.
So where do we go next? We've
Yeah.
covered navigating, we've covered difference, and we've covered unconscious bias, including these mechanics and tools. I wrote down,
You know what? I just noticed as you flip the screen for difference, there was one piece there that we've
oh,
said
good.
in other words, but just want to pause on. That there's wisdom in resistance. So we've talked about this, the discomfort that might be there, even that place of recognizing the shortcut that our brain makes and the resistance that it might have to opening beyond that. But what we want to normalize and invite is that, and not just, well, it's around this topic, but in every way, when there is resistance, either inner resistance or resistance in the relationship, there's gems of information that can come up there too. So we want you to stay, be with it, embrace it, and see what it reveals both for you and for the potential of how you can show up for your client.
Love it. There's a perspective shift there, right? That I certainly went through in my own evolution as a coach, which is the following. I and so many of my clients are conflict averse, right? It's scary. It feels like we're about to get hurt or that we might potentially hurt someone else or we're going to step into a landmine that we did not anticipate. Conflict can be scary. The perspective shift for me is conflict is a gift because every time you and I see things differently, that's a conflict. Doesn't mean it's hostile, doesn't mean it's painful. It just means you and I see things differently. It means that this is a moment where you and I can generate shared wisdom. If we were to hold curiosity, perhaps we can deepen our wisdom together. And I get chill just thinking about the possibility because that takes us to a different level of potential. So, thinking of conflict as a gift instead of I don't know, a landmine
Mm.
might actually enable us to include it. That's what inclusion is, include it into our process with our clients.
You're making me think I am definitely conflict averse too. And for the perspective shift, I even need to take the word conflict out of it. And
Out
it's
of it.
yeah, and it's a funny experience. I have a new partner, and that's something that, when we talk about difference, when he uses the word conflict, it's like, well, this isn't conflict. This is just, being indifferent. So for me, the perspective is difference isn't conflict.
Yeah, beautiful.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the word
Hmm.
conflict is fraught. Thank you for naming
Hmm.
that. Okay, so I think that we can people have asked for these resources. Or do you
Yep.
want to let's do this and then we'll go to resources and then we'll do Q&A. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. So, so in blue is the ICF language. So a competency for an ICF coach is ongoing learning and development as coach and ongoing reflective practice. And so our invitation here and our curiosity, and we would love for you to type this in the chat too, is what do you want to continue to reflect on? We are going to go to the Q&A after, and so there may be more that comes up related to that. But what further learning and development does this spark in you? Thank you,
Reflecting.
Mikkel or Michelle. Yeah, conflict exploration. Intuition can be tainted with bias. Yeah. And just to build on that, Susanna, what I would say is intuition is tainted with bias simply because it is coming. When I share my intuition, it's coming through my filter. It's coming through my frame of reference, my lived experience. And so we want to, the other piece that's important to take away from this isn't about becoming so open and aware that you no longer have bias, that there isn't anything that's unconscious. Forevermore, it really isn't possible as human beings to be open and available to absolutely all information. So just knowing that it does come through my lived experience allows me to be in relationship and design with my clients how to use the intuition that I share.
Mm. I love this. I open to revealing my shortfalls and flaws
Mhm.
and addressing my own immunity to change. We do, thank you, Indrajit. We do have that impulse that to stay, to be right, to do certain things. Like, how immune are we to our own process of change? Can we
Mhm.
problematize that? Can we expand that? Can we grow that? In service of ourselves, but also in service of our clients. Ultimately, I think many of us became coaches for that promise.
Mhm.
So I've actually gotten some good ideas here on what I want to continue to reflect on. I wonder if there's anything coming to you, Kristen, on what you want to continue to reflect on.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's uh, one of the pieces also that comes up for me every time I'm in conversation around this, every time I'm interacting with a client, teaching a class, there's something new for me to learn about this. Um, yeah. I'm still also scrolling through all
Yeah,
the great suggestions, and it feels like important points to
lots.
emphasize too. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to continue to reflect on this idea of curiosity is daring to not know. The word
Mm,
daring, when you said it, really hooked me because it is a radical act to be curious and to really suspend what we know and to go into places where we risk being not smart, not intelligent, not, dumb, all those things that we're trained and conditioned not to be,
yeah.
but in service of our client to actually develop that deeper understanding.
Mhm. Yeah. There's a piece that was shared here also that I'm sitting with, and it feels like sitting with me on a personal level of where this might show up too, is curiosity around how somebody's lived experience might impact them and not assuming that it does too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that
Hmm.
when that curiosity is on the tip of your tongue to say it.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we thank you for all of those beautiful continuing to reflect commitments. We want to share with you a few resources. Um, the Jedi for Coaches program is an ICF certification program. You can get 8 continuing education credits. If you're interested in furthering your knowledge on and your practice as a coach who coaches with these ideas of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in mind. So there's a link there if you'd like to register for that. If you're interested also in understanding what your possible stumbling blocks are, Kristen shared one of her stumbling blocks here, right? But we all have stumbling blocks on our journeys to being inclusive coaches, inclusive leaders. And we have this free assessment here that you can understand what your stumbling blocks are. Mine, I'll just be completely honest with you, this one comes up a lot for me, is the tendency to please people. And that really comes in my way of building inclusive spaces. And I catch myself regularly. So like, oh, am I doing this just to appease someone? Or am I doing it for inclusion? Like, why am I doing this thing I'm doing? And this readiness report helps me to see that often I do it in an effort to please someone else. All of this, a lot of what Kristen and I talked about is in this book here. The book that I wrote, it just came out a month ago. It's called Stumbling Towards Inclusion. Those of you on that journey to finding grace in your own imperfection, this is the book that can help you to be okay with imperfection. Kristen's website is here. Please go visit Kristen's website and please be in touch with Kristen and myself. Um, we love to hear from you. We really do. I think there's just an H missing in your website here, life
Uh,
leadership.
oh,
Uh,
yes.
I think
That
people
is
would
a
figure that
spelling
out,
error. Yeah.
but we really do
Leadership
love
rather than leadership.
leadership. Yes.
Yeah.
My email address is pnalkur@theroundtableinstitute.com. I really do love hearing from people, and I noticed that we have a few Q&As here, so I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing so that we can talk about these Q&As. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good. I was just looking at them also. I think the first one related to the resources is, well, we can answer it here. In the bottom of your screen, there's a tab that says resources, and all of the resources are linked there.
Okay, so we have a few questions here. How do we acknowledge from Kathy in coaching the systemic designs that create and maintain sameness and discourage connection across difference? I have a perspective on that. Kristen, do you also?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead with yours, Priya, and
Okay.
then I will. I was
Um,
just taking it in. Yeah.
so I'm going to preface this by saying that over the past 18 years of coaching, I have definitely taken some liberties and broken some rules in an effort to like stretch myself. And I don't know if this is a rule I'm breaking or not, but in my co-creation of the relationship with my client, I will say clearly, I'm aware that there are systems of oppression playing into our dynamic that you and I have no control over, but we can bring our awareness to it. Is that interesting to you? Is that something worth exploring here? And with that, I immediately bring it into our space to say, you're not to blame. I'm not to blame. But there are these larger systemic issues that we can't deny. We might as well dance with them and work with them. So that's how I bring it into my coaching dynamic.
Yeah, similarly, it feels like what this is prompting me to share are the four different levels of lived experience also. So there is the intrapersonal experience, the experience I have within myself. There's the interpersonal experience, which is the relationship I have outside of myself with others. And then there is the systemic experience and the institutionalized experience. So the systemic is the piece that Priya is talking about, is the systems of oppression that operate. And as you said in your question, Kathy, that they operate as a way to create and maintain sameness and specific sameness. And there's certain characteristics to those systems. And through my training and my learning outside of coaching, but that has influenced my coaching, what I have started to do, and I design this with my clients, and it's specific around my brand and what I bring to my coaching. And I ask for permission to do this, but I will name in that skill of articulate what's going on, I will use it to articulate the level three that might be there. And so I will name the systems and how they're at play, the how that the patterns might be playing out, and I will check in with them. So it's always coming from like, this is how the systems operate. This is what, some of the patterns that show up. How much of this are you feeling, experiencing? One of the pieces that I find when I do bring that into the conversation is the personal responsibility that somebody holds around the weight of these systems and the responsibility to shift what is beyond their internal, intra, and interpersonal experience gets lifted off of them. And there's a different way that they can get in touch with their agency as a result. And as I said, I design that with my clients and I check in with them, and I'm still working from the place of finding out their own wisdom and experience around this.
Nice. And I
Yeah.
love being able to use those levels with clients to say, what would be your perspective from the intrapersonal? Now go to
Mhm.
systemic. Now go to
Yeah.
institutional, right? Like so that we can see that we're biased in a particular perspective. Oh,
Mhm.
I tend to live in interpersonal. What would it be like if I moved to this other perspective? They really are perspectives that you can introduce into your coaching dynamic.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Oh,
the question.
Brittany has a great question.
What
Uh,
supported you both in moving past the I don't want to say this wrong or offend or ask the wrong way to get to the space of naming and having the courage to ask questions around identity? I'm still working on it, so
me
I
too.
haven't gotten there, but I practice it all the time. And what I'll say this is for me as an individual, it's really important to me that I practice it in safe relationships where I know I will be held and I won't be punished. And so I do that with my boyfriend. I'll say, like, hey, Andre, I want to try out this thing. Right. So he understands enough about coaching, or I'll try it with other team members at Roundtable Institute, and then I'll slowly build into places where it feels like a little bit more of a risk. So I might try it with a long-term client that I've had for a long time, and I'll say, "Hey, I'm about to take a risk here. I'm experimenting with a new tool. Can I try it here?" They always say yes. And because I've just included them into my process. That's part of my practice of inclusion, is to ask permission. And so I try to be very transparent, like, I'm a little scared to do this. I'm taking a risk here. I'm really trying to amplify my courage in this moment. And in doing that, I know I'm doing two things. One, I'm speaking my truth. And two, I'm giving them language to speak their truth when they're ready to do it. Often they're way more ready than I am to do it. So it's naming the courage, naming the risk, taking a risk, and starting in safe places where I know I'll be held, and then moving it into my coaching practice.
The piece that I'll add in addition, it's plus one to everything that Priya said there. And I I have not moved past it either. But what I make, there's two things I make in service of the client more important than my fear in that moment. And I also trust in our ability to stay and repair and be in the conversation. If I do offend, if I say something wrong, if it doesn't land in a way that serves the client, I make that more important than not saying it and filtering. And I've
Yeah,
learned through doing it to become more daring and courageous too.
I
Sorry.
think naming that bias is really important, right? The
Mhm,
bias to do what's in service of our client.
mhm.
Um, and sometimes our clients don't hold that bias or don't understand that bias. But often if I'm at the precipice of needing to repair, I'll name that I had that bias. This is what I felt and thought was in service of you, and here's why.
Mhm.
Um, when you repair, by the way, apology is not repair. It's the beginning of a repair. Repair goes further than the apology. It's really examining the underlying assumptions that got you to the place where you needed to repair in the first place. And what was the underlying belief? Can you share that with your client, so that you have some foundation to build a conversation on?
And the
Thanks.
piece I'll add in addition, Priya, is listening to what the other person wants to tell you in that moment rather than defending, but really hearing what impact it had and receiving that.
Speaking of defending, Anna has a question. Could you please give us clues on how to name this bias when we see it in our coachees without taking them into defense mode? So I have a few perspectives on this too. What do you think?
Um, Sorry, I was looking at the following question. So go ahead, you take this one. And then
Okay,
I'm just noticing the time too, because I think we're wrapping up in a
we have
minute.
1 minute
So if I,
left. Is that
yes,
right? Okay.
yes, yeah.
Well, let me take this real quick. First of all, hey, bring on the defensiveness. If that, I'm not going to do something to make you defensive, but if you get defensive, that's worth exploring.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think I want to avoid or prevent defensiveness with my clients. If it shows up, then something has been hooked, and that is a beautiful place to explore. But if we want to put their defenses down, we have to disarm ourselves first so that it gives a space for the clients to also disarm themselves. Now, how do I name it in the first place? With curiosity, right? Curiosity protects me every single time. Hey, client, I'm curious. Is this bias playing out? What do you think? What bias do you think is playing out? Knowing that I might be completely wrong. And yes, bring it on if I'm wrong. Show me that I'm wrong, or show me what you're defensive about. Let's go there.
Yeah. And the word that I would add in addition to that curiosity is humility in those moments too. Really, it comes back to that piece of really being able to receive and be genuinely curious in those moments too. And just to double click on not to be afraid of the defensiveness. Yeah.
Mm. So many good questions. Um, what do we
Yeah.
do here? Stay in touch. Let's stay in touch
Yes.
about these
Stay in
questions.
touch. Yeah, and reach out, as Priya said. The I think both two emails were there. So my leadership one with the H missing. Um, you can get a hold of me through the collective email too. But both Priya and I love being in this conversation. Reach out if you have more questions. So sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them, and thank you all for being here.